Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Rumman Chowdhury of Humane Intelligence and Sir Nick Clegg of Meta and our esteemed panel.
So I go here.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. I'm the CEO of the tech nonprofit Humane Intelligence, and I'm joined here with Sir Nick Clegg of Meta. I'm very excited to be introducing this panel to you, but before the winners come on board, I want to talk a little bit about the Llama Impact Program. Now, as we know, large language models and generative AI in general has really shifted the landscape of policy, communication, our interpersonal relationships, and how we live and act with in our technological future. Now, in 2023, October 2023, Meta announced their inaugural Llama Impact Grants program. Now, this was a global call for proposals to sort innovative use cases of Llama 2 and 3, but specifically it was around addressing critical global challenges around education, the environment, and open innovation. They put out the call and the world answered. There were over 800 applications from over 90 countries, really thinking through how this technology of artificial intelligence has become a global phenomenon. From there, 20 finalists were emerged to advance to the last round of the program. So at UNGA this year, where all of us are, this panel is announcing the winners of the impact grants, and Sir Nick will be doing the honors. But also, I just want to acknowledge the inspiration from these individuals who had participated and submitted, even if they're not winners. There were submissions from the Middle East, Turkey, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, and they all addressed some of the region's largest issues. And I also want to remind folks in the audience who may be interested in a program like this that as of August 2024, they're accepting grants for phase 2. So if this panel is interesting and inspiring to you, then maybe think through an idea of your own. How might you use Llama to solve a big pressing problem in the world? Now, Sir Nick, I wanted to pass it over to you.
Well, the only thing I would want to add to that introduction is that, as we'll hopefully hear from the recipients of this, the first wave of the Llama Impact Grants, the fact that Llama is freely available to them, is open source, that they can slice and dice it, fine tune it, that they can see the weights, has clearly been crucial to apply it in the very sort of versatile way that I believe they have. And we'll hear from Alpan, from Ken, from Rikin, whether it's the project which has helped to match patients to cancer trials more fully, whether it's helping young school pupils learn to read in Gujarat, whether it is helping subsistence farmers on half-acre plots in sub-Saharan Africa to receive AI-generated information about how they should till their ground and so on. All of these are wonderful examples of taking a foundation model, Llama, and then building extremely specific use cases on top of that. And I think what is so wonderful about that is it shows the sort of marriage of the heavy lifting that big companies like Meta have to do, because it's an extremely expensive, energy intensive, data intensive, compute intensive thing, as you know, to build these underlying foundation models. And then through open sourcing, you just allow the ingenuity of the world to flourish. And I hope that in doing so, that this program, these impact grants, for those who are not really following the AI debate very closely, or aren't following the debate about open sourcing versus proprietary API-based models, that this will kind of, in a sense, bring it to life. Mm-hmm. Because helping young people to learn how to read is a lot more inspiring in many respects than it is trading numbers about how many GPUs you've used to train a model. And so I really hope that as we proceed with the next generation of this program, and I hope we will be able to deepen and expand it, we'll just be able to sort of populate the debate with lots and lots of specific instances which are good for the world, which show the virtues of open sourcing, and also show that this sort of technological transformation we're going through is only as good as the way in which the underlying foundation models are then translated into something which is actually useful to human beings. And the big tech companies, on the whole, don't do that. It's the developers who do that. And all of this is about the sort of partnership, the open source partnership between big model builders such as ourselves and a great ecosystem of individual developers. And it's just really exciting. It's really exciting to see, just the thought of a young pupil reading better, or a patient receiving better cancer treatment, or a farmer being able to work out how to get a higher yield from their crops, and that all comes from this underlying foundational technology is, to me at least, extremely inspiring.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you use the word ingenuity. I think a lot of people misunderstand how open source can be used positively. Like what you're doing is, as you mentioned, harnessing the best of what a big company can do, which is invest the time, resource, skill, funding into creating the core, and then letting people be imaginative on top of that.
Yeah, you're creating a sort of vast sort of petri dish in which a huge number of things then germinate and flourish. And of course, one of the I was talking to Alpan about it just yesterday. One of the many virtues, in my view, of having these open source models is that the developers have complete control over the way in which they customize it for their own purposes, because there's no API, there's no data, there's no umbilical data link back to our servers as there are in a proprietary or API-based approach. And I think that's quite interesting, because it's obviously very good for developers such as the 3 prize winners we're going to hear from shortly. But it's also, I think it has quite big implications for the sovereignty and control over this technology at a time when there's not an unreasonable amount of debate in weeks like this, Unger Week, about, is this age of generative artificial intelligence going to lead to an over-concentration of power in the hands of the small number of very large companies who've got the money and the deep pockets and so on, and the compute and so on, to build these foundation models in the first place? I think through open sourcing, you really are quite dramatically democratizing it, because you're just saying, here, you take this and you have complete control over it. None of the data flows back to us. And I think that was something that I learned in the conversations we had with these prize winners yesterday.
That's a pretty critical distinction in a time in which we have a lot of people quite concerned about the use of their data and training and building models. But we will not hold you back from our prize winners much longer. I'd like to introduce to the stage Dr. Alpan Raval, the Chief AI Scientist of Wadhwani AI, Mr. Kenneth Kehl of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Rikin Gandhi, co-founder and CEO of Digital Green. Please give our winners a round of applause. Now I'm going to give you all each like a minute just to talk a little bit about the technology that you're building. I know the audience is probably pretty excited now that Nick has laid the groundwork of what exactly it is that the Llama Impact Grants were trying to fund, build, and inspire. So maybe, Rikin, we'll start with you.
So at Digital Green, we work with small-scale farmers across South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. There's more than 500 million farmers who earn between $1 to $2 a day, and they struggle to feed themselves, let alone our global food supply, and are dealing with the struggles of climate change every day. At Digital Green, we've been using videos that have been produced by and for farmers to share improved sustainable agricultural practices more efficiently. And over the last 2.5 years, we've been taking these local language videos that really feature fellow farmers as their stars into a knowledge base that can be queried on communication platforms like WhatsApp, in local language voice and text, and with images, to be able to triage the issues that these farmers are facing. And we've been able to show that we can reduce the cost of these extension programs that are trying to train these farmers in collaboration with organizations like 1 Acre Fund from $3.50 US down to 35 cents. And more than that, we're seeing that these farmers are developing their own voices to share what are the issues that they're facing in the field as they deal with these climate issues to inform researchers and policymakers at the same time. So we're really grateful to be part of this challenge.
Amazing. Great to hear from you. And Kenneth, would you like to talk a little bit about your project?
Sure. So I'm a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute up in Boston, and our project focuses on addressing the problem of patient access to clinical trials. So cancer clinical trials are the primary means by which we evaluate the safety and effectiveness of a new treatment, but historically under 10% of adults with cancer have enrolled in trials, yet at the same time, up to 1 in 5 trials closes without identifying enough patients to answer its scientific questions and get treatments to patients. That mismatch has created a pretty clear opportunity to develop computational tools that match patients to trials. But in the past, one of the major challenges has been the key data points necessary to do this task. What type of cancer does someone have? What treatments have they had? What biomarkers or molecular characteristics does the tumor exhibit? All that information has tended to live in the unstructured text, the messy, kind of freewheeling documents that make up electronic health records. By some estimates, up to 80% of the information in a patient's health record lives in those unstructured text documents. So what we're going to be able to use Llama to do is extract and structure that information both from patient histories and clinical trial information, match it together, and distill out a pipeline for rapidly ranking trials in the order that they might be relevant for patients. And we're going to pilot deployment of that pipeline with one of the disease centers at our institution that focuses on first moving a treatment from the lab out to patients, so first in human studies, with the goal of ultimately accelerating the whole clinical trial enterprise and getting new treatments to patients faster.
Amazing. Round of applause. And Alpan, could you please talk about your project?
Our goal at Wadhwani AI is to use AI to benefit underserved communities across the global south. As part of this project, we aim to improve learning outcomes for primary and middle grade school children. And the way we plan to do that is a multi-step approach. Each step uses AI. The first step in this approach is based on the thesis that in order to read to learn, it's important to first learn to read. And so what we do is assess reading fluency among students with AI by building upon speech recognition models. We have this rolled out across the state of Gujarat in India in collaboration with the government of Gujarat state, and it's being used by over 2 million students today. We get all this data in the back end, so we know what words students are getting wrong at a very fine-grained and personalized level. We can now use this information and bring in Llama 3 to design content around those words. And this is where the power of open source really comes in, because we can modify the parameters or the probabilities in Llama 3 to make sure that the content is biased towards those words that students are getting wrong. And then the students can use this content, use these text paragraphs to practice. So that's the second step. The last step in this is to use Llama 3 to design questions around the content and test reading comprehension. So this is the way we plan to improve learning outcomes using language models.
Now, Nick, Meta has put a stake in the ground, as you mentioned, when it comes to your stance on open source, and it's actually quite different from most of the biggest players in industry. What do you hope others in the industry take from the work you're doing, and how do you think this could help access to this technology at a global scale?
So yeah, I mean, we've been pretty clear that much in the same way that if you just look at the evolution of the internet itself, I mean, in the old days of Linux versus Windows, or look at the encryption industry or the cybersecurity industry, they're all built on open source technology. I mean, this is not a new idea. This is in fact a very old idea. So I always sort of, when people sort of say, oh, you're taking a different point of view, in many ways we're just maintaining an open source stance that we've certainly had for a long time, and it's certainly been embraced across the industry, and of course particularly amongst researchers and developers over a long period of time. And over the last 10 years or so, our AI research team have open sourced well over 1,000 AI databases and models. So it's not new for us. And also, I've got to be completely open about this, our business model doesn't depend upon charging for access to our foundation model. It's just not the way our business is built. We Meta is a major ads business. And so we don't have the same commercial need that other companies do. So quite understandably, I don't want to denigrate it. They almost have to build a different business model where you're in effect charging in one way or another a license fee in effect to access to the technology. We don't need to do that. So it both goes with the grain of what we've done before. We think it goes with the grain of the way in which the internet itself has developed over time. And for the reasons I said earlier, I mean, if you sort of flip the question around, just imagine if we were in an environment where there was no open sourcing of foundation models. I just think there'd be so much concern, quite rightly, about the almost sort of unimaginable over-concentration of power amongst a very small number of deep-pocketed companies. I just think there would be such a clamor for greater sort of democratization of this industry. So clearly, of this technology. So clearly, there's space for different approaches, for a proprietary API-based approach. I think the gap, or what appears to be the gap previously between the so-called frontier closed models and the latest generation of Llama models does appear to be getting sort of narrower and narrower. So it appears to be that the models will all cluster roughly around the same sort of broad bracket of capability. And of course, we hope over time that more and more developers, that more and more researchers, more and more entrepreneurs, more and more academics will use our open source models, because that's what it's there for as many, the more the merrier.
Well, it's an interesting point. I'm going to go back to the point you made about ingenuity. No matter how big or well-funded a company is, it only can have a certain amount of idea space, right? Even just the privilege of working in Silicon Valley makes you the 1% of the 1% of the Western world, right? So there's only so much diversity of thought.
There really is. I mean, you know this better than I do. But I defer to you on this, but there just is the wisdom of crowds is a thing.
Exactly.
You do get wisdom through people testing and retesting and challenging, and the idea that you just confer all of that expectation of ingenuity, yet alone all the mitigations and the safety work to companies themselves to, in a sense, play whack-a-mole with their own models. I just think experience certainly over the last 20 years suggests that the open approach generally leads to greater innovation, greater ingenuity, greater democratization of the technology, and actually over the time to more resilient systems as well.
So I want to bump it to all of our winners here. On that note, how has open source changed your approach to solving the problem you're trying to solve? Open to anybody who wants to hop in.
I can jump in. I think that I agree with what Nick is saying, that open source can give organizations like government, ministries of agriculture, NGOs like One Acre Fund that we're partnering with in Kenya, control over the content that goes into the knowledge bases, the alignment of these AI models towards particular climate and gender objective functions in a way that proprietary systems can't. The second is that it can also reduce the cost of operations for local NGOs and governments who often are resource constrained, and especially for the kind of constituencies of farmers that we serve, to be able to afford. And I think there's even an opportunity that we're involved in to say that big tech is creating these general purpose large language models like Llama, but even these domain-specific versions, including handling local languages like Swahili or Gikuyu in Kenya, can also become an open source digital public good so that other agricultural NGOs, governments don't have to reinvent that wheel either. And the last thing I'd say is that I think there's also an opportunity for these also small language models to also become more available on local devices, because data costs for some of these constituencies, like the farmers that we serve, are high in some of the markets that we operate in, and being able to just self-service themselves without incurring that cost can be a huge advantage.
Right.
I might weigh in sort of from a healthcare perspective. So obviously in healthcare and cancer care, we work with sensitive, complicated data. It's patients' medical information, and it's very high volume. I represent a team of both oncologists, software engineers led by the Knowledge Systems Group, and Dr. Ethan Sarami at Dana-Farber, who all focus on applying new technologies in a safe and responsible way. And so obviously one benefit of open source is we can import the model into our health system, run it without the patient data ever leaving our infrastructure, and run it at scale. Even if we have millions of clinical documents to run through, we don't have to count every word, every token, worried that we're going to rapidly overextend our cloud budgets. So I think those are two key benefits.
For us, open source is crucial for the reasons that both Rikin and Kenneth mentioned. As I mentioned already, we need open source models in order to be able to tweak parameters around designing specific personalized content for kids. The other advantage of open source is that we can fine-tune the models so that they're child appropriate, they're safe. And safety has a cultural context, so we can tune the models so that they are safe in an appropriate way, depending on the local culture, the local context. And of course, there's the cost issue. We have initial versions of these speech recognition models already scaled up to over 1 million students. We plan to use Llama to develop models in English. English is an aspirational language across India, so there's the potential to roll it out to tens of millions of students. Inference costs are a huge barrier if you're not dealing with open source models. So it's very important that we have open source models in place in order to be able to create that level of scaled impact. And lastly, there's data privacy concerns. With open source models, we are not worried about data leaving the country and going into a server outside the country. So this is also very important.
So last question to you all as we wrap up. The word I'm leaving with from Nick would be ingenuity, the ability of open source to bring ingenuity. Each of you, what would be one word that you think open source is bringing to your project, your mission, right, and your goals for what you're building? We'll start with you, Alpan.
So I think in general, for a country like India, where there's so many languages, there's 26 official languages, hundreds of unofficial languages, thousands of dialects. Open source is the way to build, for speech recognition. Having open source models that can be fine-tuned to local contexts is a huge way to unlock digitization, because then you can leapfrog from voice straight into structured digital data by building upon open source models. And that's going to represent a huge opportunity going forward in terms of building more downstream models that can utilize this information, that can utilize this data for public good.
So context digitization, Ken.
I think I might say, if I had to pick one word, scale, since there's been a goal in healthcare to make a learning health system for really a couple of decades, but we've been blocked by the way that so much information is sort of locked away in unstructured form. So I think this technology finally allows us to really make use of it at scale.
Wonderful. And Rikin?
I'd say agency for farmers themselves to be able to share their own innovations and data with their peers, to learn from each other, and to even teach all of us in the global community in a way that before generative AI was not possible.
Amazing. Well, another round of applause for our winners. Thank you very much.